Hey guys, so I want to have a little fun to start out with tonight. You guys cool with that? So I have this theory about people and crowds that you can start a chant. I love you guys too. Okay. You can start a chant about anywhere, at any time, in any crowd. Any person can do it. In fact, I want to try a few right now. Okay, ready? So you guys just repeat after me, all right? We're going to try some chants. Chants, okay? C-I-Y. 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 Okay, awesome. You guys are amazing. Okay, so you can start a chant. Now, I don't know what kind of person you are in your friend group, but I'm the kind of person that you can dare to do just about anything for the sake of a laugh or a memory. Like, I am that idiot, you know? That's like, okay, that'll be fun, and then you're like, oh my gosh, my back hurts now, you know? So I've got a few embarrassing examples of this, but the one that is the gold standard to me is of about 10 years ago. My husband and our two closest friends, Nate and Brooke, I'll show you guys a picture. We went to a Michigan versus Northwestern game. Here we are. Now I know some of you guys are OH2 people. Here's what you need to know. Here's what you need to know. I do not care. Your boos don't offend me at all. So my husband is a super big Michigan fan. I know, boo. And yay, super big Michigan fan. I did not really grow up in a college sports family, so I didn't realize the cult that exists amongst college sports. So I was just like along for the ride, honestly. I was a football cheerleader in high school, but as it turns out, you do have to know about stunts and flips. Not a lot about football, so didn't know anything about football. So this is one of my first live college football games, and I'm there for the merriment of it all, you know, the marching band, the popcorn. I'm like, this is awesome. And I'm getting a little bored, and so I say to my friend Nate, I think it'd be fun to start some chants in here. And he's like, that would be so fun. I was like, the thing is, though, is I don't really know what to say that's going to be relevant to this situation. So you're going to need to just tell me what to say. And he's like, deal. So I start a few, right, where I just am like, Michigan, Michigan. And then people just start chanting around me. That's right. And then I start with the next one that's real obvious. Defense. Defense. Yep. Awesome. So then I start with that one, and you know, it's so easy. Like 100 to 200 people in a second are like, yeah, defense, you know. And I'm like, oh, the power of this is insane. So, and again, don't care about this game, 0% care. Other than the marching band, I really enjoyed that. So the game is going very badly for Northwestern, and this wasn't like a super big rivalry of any kind. Like, no Northwestern fan was like, I think this is our year, you know, like Michigan usually had beat them around that time. So no one's really like emotionally invested in this, all right? I say that for a reason. So I look over at my friend Nate, and I'm like, all right, these are getting kind of boring. And he's like, I'm going to give you some crazy stuff to say. I'm like, deal. So he's like, start chanting, it's time to pay the price. Which made no sense in this context. There was no price to be paid, okay? Like, it wasn't like Michigan fans came with a lot of angst, all right, about Northwestern. And so I just start screaming, it's time to pay the price. You guys do it with me? It's time to pay the price. It's time to pay the price. All right, that was amazing. So I do that, and guys, here's the thing, is a couple confused people who'd been chanting with me at this whole time are like, it's time to pay the price, you know, and they're just kind of saying it. Nate's going along with me. Two people in front of me left the section at that point. They were like, this girl cannot deal with this annoying girl, which, I mean, I don't blame them, honestly. But here's the thing. We are an easily influenced people, right? We are an easily influenced people, easily swayed. And I say that, and I know we all are like, yeah, duh, but the thing is I actually don't think we actually know that. See, you and I are being discipled at all times. And when I say that, I don't mean just that when we're reading our Bibles, or we're in our small group, or we're in church, or we're listening to messages. We are being discipled then. But when I say discipled, I mean learn, influenced, taught. We are being influenced, taught, learning, taking in at all times by a lot of different people and a lot of different things. Who we follow, who we admire, all of it shapes us. It shapes how we think, who we like, what we believe. And so my question for you as we get started that I want you to just think about on your own is who or what truly guides your life? What voices mean the most to you when it comes to the decisions you make, what you believe about God and people and yourself? Like, who leads you really? Because I think it's easy for a lot of us to say Jesus, but I actually don't think that that's true. And I ask you that because the text that we're in tonight is actually a leadership conversation. Jesus is talking here with the Pharisees in John chapter 10, who were the religious leaders, about leadership and the kind of leader that he is versus who they were. And all week we've been in the Gospel of John, and John was written in a time where the church was enduring so much suffering and persecution, and he wanted them to know Jesus can be trusted no matter what. In trial, in suffering, in pain, John wanted people to know Jesus could be trusted. And he's talking to the Pharisees here in John chapter 10 about who his people, who he calls sheep, are influenced by, whose voices they recognize and follow. Now see, usually when you hear someone teach this passage, they'll usually spend a lot of time talking about how dumb sheep are, right? The thing is I think we all kind of know, right? Like they're idiots, you know? Like just not the smartest animal. You know what? I think it's a little crazy. Back in 2005, there was a story of an entire herd of Turkish sheep, almost 1,600 sheep, who followed one sheep off a cliff. You guys are like, that is dark, I know. And it gets darker, okay? 400 sheep, like cushioned the blow and all died, and the rest of them fell on top of them and they lived. I know, that's so dark. But they all just followed one off a cliff. And you guys are like, she. We are easily influenced. And you guys are like, those sheep, they're so dumb. But we all just chanted, it's time to pay the price together. So let's not get too judgmental. You know what I'm saying? That's right, yep. Yep, it is. And so, I'm not going to spend my time talking to you about sheep because honestly, we all live amongst ourselves, we know. Tonight, I want to talk to you about how Jesus describes himself as the door and the shepherd. Because knowing those two things will shape the rest of your life every day. And so let's hop in and let's turn to John chapter 10. You guys should have already gotten in there. We're going to start with verse 1 and go through verse 10 together. And I'll read, it'll be on the screen if you need that. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens, the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. But I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. So what's Jesus talking about here? When most of us think about sheep and shepherds, we probably think of green little pastures with cute little baby sheep, but that's not what this is. The context here is that Jesus is speaking to the Pharisees, the religious leaders of his day, those who were obsessed with the law and making sure everyone else followed it, to the point that it really marginalized people because they could not keep up with the standards. They didn't make enough money to take off the amount of time they were asking for and to eat the kinds of foods they were asking for. And the Pharisees had taken this to a place that it was never intended. And what you also need to know about what's happening right here is that this was a politically loaded and charged environment. And when I say that, I mean that, see, between the Old Testament and right now, as we find ourselves in this passage, there were 400 years of silence from God. And so during this time in history, Alexander the Great conquered the world, took over where the Jewish community was, and his vision was to conquer people, both through the military and through culture. He wanted Greek culture to take over everywhere. And I tell you that because it's like, well, what does that have to do with it? Actually, it has to do a lot with this. Because people were wanting that kind of leader from the Messiah, that kind of perceived power. And here, Jesus describes himself as a door and a shepherd. So notice in the first verse that he talks about bringing in the sheep into the sheepfold. Just raise your hand, you don't have to scream at me. Does anyone actually know what a sheepfold is? You've heard of it, you know well, about 4 of us. Yep. So for all the rest of us, myself included, here's what a little bit of a sheepfold is, all right? So in the wilderness in the ancient Near East, if the sheep were exposed at night, they would have been very vulnerable. And so shepherds would bring them into sheepfolds or pens to keep them safe. I'm going to show you guys a couple of pictures. They look a lot like this. They'd bring them in with walls around, and as you can see, there is an opening where the door is. The primary purpose of the sheepfold or a pen was to protect the sheep from intruders like hostile animals, wolves, even people. So the shepherd's primary role was to guard the sheep, and he also laid in the door so that no one could get in to harm the sheep. So Jesus is establishing here, he is the kind of shepherd to both bring them into the pen and lay in the door. He protects them so they can flourish. Notice also Jesus mentions the constant presence of a thief and a robber. He looks at what the thief's goal is in verse 10, to steal, kill, and destroy. And you can see why Jesus ends up being crucified, because he says anyone who came before him is a thief and a liar. And what do thieves do? They cross legitimate boundaries set up to guard and protect with the intent to destroy. So I think there are 2 primary ways that this works out in our lives, because it would be so easy here to be like, well, yeah, but that was a super long time ago, so what does that have to do with me? Like, what makes me a sheep in this? I think there are 2 primary ways that the enemy jumps over the wall to steal, kill, and destroy us. The first is self-righteousness. Another word would be religion. Or in other words, you will never measure up. You will never be as good as me. I am awesome. I don't need anyone. I don't need anything. I'm good on my own. And I think the default mode of the human heart is to settle here, to look down on other people, to want them to measure up to you, but you know that you yourself can't even measure up. But to say, I've got this. I've got control of my life. I'm good. And look at all these lowly people that can't get it together. That's self-righteousness. And I think the thief jumps over the wall and gets to our hearts like that. Because this is the kind of thing that happens when you think you're above other people. And some of you know what I'm talking about, either because you've been impacted by a person like this, maybe even in the church, or if you're really honest, you've been this person. Where self-righteousness has taken over your heart and mind and it changes how you see the world. And so I just want to tell you, if you don't think Jesus can be angry with people, you've got the wrong Jesus. If you're overwhelmed by shame that you've experienced in the church, trust me, Jesus is more angry. The second way that I think the thief jumps over the wall to steal, kill, and destroy is through rebellion. And by rebellion, I mean sin. And by sin, I mean running away from God. James 1:13-15 describes rebellion as someone who is tempted, which leads to desire, which leads to sin, which leads to death. And I think there's an order to this because I don't think anyone just wakes up and finds themselves in sin. See, when you're tempted, you don't sense desire is coming. And when you're in desire, you might not sense that sin is coming. And when you're in sin, you might not sense that spiritual, emotional, relational death is coming until you are in the pit and you look around and you are lonely and you've got broken relationships and you are empty and what you thought would satisfy you over here in temptation, desire, and sin has left you broken. And you are grabbing and grabbing and grabbing at anything to fill that cup that Brad talked about last night. Did any of you watch the documentary on the Fire Festival? Anybody in here? I know it's kind of a millennial thing of me to say, but so the Fire Festival, just as a short recap, it was this music festival a couple years ago in 2017. I got curious and watched this just on a weird Saturday. And this guy named Billy, basically, in summary, fooled a bunch of people into buying tickets to a music festival. Here we go. On the left is what it was advertised as. All right, and they said all these crazy, awesome musicians are going to be there. It's going to be gourmet food, amazing accommodations. You guys, thousands of people bought tickets for thousands of dollars. They said it was going to be on an amazing, secluded island. It's going to be the best week of your life. You are going to have the most amazing experience. It'll change your life forever. And on the right is what people showed up to. Those things do not match, in case you're confused, right? And so they show up to this, and people are ticked, as you can imagine, and it's a total nightmare. In fact, there's a picture of, yep, here we go. I mean, does that look like a glamorous week to you? No, these people look very scared and confused. Did I end up in the wrong plane? What is happening here? They were advertised to get the best food of their lives, and this is what they got. You guys ready for this? Here we go. Weird bread, I think potentially cheese, potentially lettuce and tomato in a box. Best meals of your life. There you go. And the thing is Billy's now in prison for 6 years, so don't worry about it. Fraud, theft, doesn't end well, as it turns out. So the thing is, though, is it's so easy, and it was easy for me to watch this and judge these people oh my gosh, these people, they're idiots. What are they doing, But the thing is that you and I do this all the time. It's the absolute perfect picture of the way that sin works in our lives. All of it was an illusion of what life could be, except apart from God. I think that's what sin looks like to us sometimes, and we don't know it until we are in the absolute pit. The thief lied to us and told us it'd be awesome. We bought the tickets, we show up, and we find ourselves surrounded by loneliness, broken relationships, and we realize that we bought tickets to the illusion of an abundant life that has nothing to do with Jesus. So Jesus, there's good news, offers another way to the abundant life, which is himself. In Jesus' description of himself as the door and the shepherd, he shares 3 things that will happen when he becomes both of those things in our lives. The first that we see in verse 3 is that we will listen to his voice and we will know that voice. Shepherds have an incredible relationship with their sheep. There was a story in the 1980s of officers in charge of a village in Palestine, and they confiscated all of the town's sheep. And the soldier who was guarding all the sheep and keeping them from the people who actually owned them was approached by a widow one day. And what you have to know is that the widow's livelihood depended on these sheep. So she was desperate because this meant she could be homeless, she could lose everything. She needed these sheep back. And so she approaches him and begs for the sheep. And he turns around and he's like seeing all these sheep. And he's like, well, what do you want me to do? Like, I can't give them back to you. Like, they're not marked. There's so many people, hundreds of people's sheep in here. How are you supposed to know? And he says, if you can call them and they come to you, you can have them. You can have them back. So her son comes and he brings his flute and plays the song that the sheep would know. And all of a sudden, her sheep are like, bah, that's our song, that's our song, that's our song. Bah, that's our song. And they follow her out. They had been with her and her son so much that they were known and they knew her in a sea of sheep. See, we all have voices in our heads that are trying to get to us, and our heads can get loud. And some of you are on paths right now that you hate, but you think you have no choice because you've already started down the road. And you think, this is just who I am. Some of you are in relationships that you know are bad for you, but you've believed the lie that nobody will love you, so the first person that even kind of glanced at you, you latched onto, and that now is what you've attached yourself to. But you know it's killing you. Some of you have attached yourselves to the lie that your purpose will come from success, fame, and money, but what you're finding is it is never enough. There is never a moment where you feel like you've arrived, where you no longer have to strive and push. And Jesus comes along and says, when you hear my voice, when you experience my love for you, it will be the loudest voice in your life. His flute call is one that says, nothing you do or don't do will make me love you less. You cannot earn my love. Leave it behind and follow me. Let me show you a different way to live. The second thing that happens when Jesus becomes our door and shepherd, again in verse 3, is that he knows us by name and leads us. He leads us. Jesus says he'll know his sheep, call them by name, lead them out, and they will follow. God calling us by name shows his power and his relationship with us. He knows us. He knows what we need, what we want. As a matter of fact, if you look back in John chapter 1, the very first words Jesus speaks in verse 38 of that chapter are, what do you want? What do you want? Because he knows what we really want. In Psalm 23, when David describes the Lord as our shepherd, he says, I shall not want. See, to the degree that you and I find ourselves wanting and wanting and wanting, it means that we are refusing to let God tend to our souls. We are refusing to let God be the thing that fills up our purpose. And Jesus asks, and he knows what we want. So where does he lead us? There's another phrase that David uses in Psalm 23 that I think speaks to a shepherd's care for the sheep, but unfortunately, so many of us don't have the context to really know its power, which is when he says, you anoint my head with oil. See, the shepherd would anoint the sheep's head with oil. Let's look at a cute picture of a baby sheep. I know, aww. The shepherd would anoint the sheep's head with oil because get this, little tiny flies that would buzz around the heads of the sheep would go in without the oil, would land on the mucus part, get in their ears, the larva would turn into worm-like things, and those worms would make their way up through the passages of the ear canals, through the nose, and burrow into their brains. I know, it's gross. But listen to this. They would drive the sheep so insane that they would bang their heads against the rock, against anything that they could to ease the anxiety, all of it would just drive them crazy, and sometimes they would die because they were going so crazy. But when the shepherd anointed their head with oil, the bugs stopped. Did not make their way into their brains. And isn't that just like the enemy? See, in Scripture, the enemy is called the father of lies, the accuser. And so for us, the lies come in through our ears and into our minds, and Jesus is offering protection so that those lies cannot take up residence in our beings. But those lies look like bitterness, rejection, anger, doubt, guilt, shame, fear, jealousy, comparison, gossip. And it goes in, and it becomes a frustration, and it drives you insane, and you can't think about anything else. And that's what the enemy does. Steals, kills, and destroys. And Jesus says, I am your shepherd. I will guard you, I will lead you out into the abundant life, but you have to make your soul's home in me. A few months ago, I got really wounded in a relationship, which isn't that just the nature of relationships with people, right? Especially in 2020, it's been a hard year for friendships. And for a few days, I went into self-righteous religious mode about this, and some of you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. Where in my mind, I made this person smaller so that I felt less hurt. And what it looked like from the outside was that I was angry, but deep down, I was so hurt. And so I vented to my husband about her. In my mind, I thought of every single bad thing this person had ever done. But the thing is that I didn't experience any kind of peace or anxiety. I left those few days just feeling anxious and angry in this person's presence. And the lies of shame, of anger, led me to a place that left me isolated and honestly just so ticked off, which isn't really a fun way to live, as it turns out. So check this out. In some places, the shepherds would make dips and make the sheep completely immerse themselves, their entire body, all of it, in oil. So that even when they'd butt heads with each other and their ram horns would lock, the oil would make it slip right off. So that they couldn't hurt each other. Jesus changes us. And when we let him speak over every single wound, every single pain, he changes the way we see. See, as I finally talked with God about that hurt, as I finally vented to God about everything that I was feeling, God is like, I know. Go to my word. And as it turns out, which I was actually not delighted to find, this is a person, at first I wasn't delighted to find, God changed my heart. This is a person he died for. This is a person he loves. This is a person he's working through. This is an image bearer of God, and my anger was keeping me from connection with him. See, some of you are wondering why you don't feel connected to God, but if you've got any broken relationships that are causing you constant tension, it impacts your relationship with God. Period. It just does. And when we go to him and we say, God, what do you think about people? He changes us. But he wants us to be so immersed in him that those bugs, those lies cannot make their homes in our hearts and minds. So the third thing that I want you to see about Jesus as the shepherd in John chapter 10, let's go back. In verse 11, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold, and I must bring them also. And he's talking about you and me here. They will listen to my voice, so there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. The third thing that changes when Jesus becomes the door and the shepherd is that we know that he laid down his life so that we could have life to the full. And as he's describing himself as the good shepherd, he's comparing and contrasting the hired hands and how little they actually care for the sheep. But what's interesting is, I think a lot of us are like, well, what is that? But I think we all know what this is. This is, maybe you've had a job like this where you were just there to make some money, right? You were just there because you didn't really care about the work you were doing. You're just there to make some money, to earn a little status maybe. Something made you feel more important by being a part of it. But you really didn't ultimately care about the thing or the people. Maybe you've had a coach like this, a teacher like this, a leader like this, where you knew, I think I'm being used by this person. They don't really care about me actually, right? That's what a hired hand does. But what this leads to is that when the sheep are in any kind of danger, a hired hand doesn't care about them. So he will run away, or worse, will throw a sheep over the wall to sacrifice that sheep instead of himself. Have you guys ever watched National Geographic? Like any of the ones where the animals are just constantly hunting other animals down and killing other animals? Yeah, it's a real jolly show. So I tried several times with my son, who is 8, and he handled it 10 times better than me, because honestly, I can just barely take it. It doesn't matter in shows like that, in episodes of reality, I realize. If it's land, sea, sky, city, suburbs, I would love a National Geographic about the suburbs. Wouldn't that be hysterical? And now the squirrel climbs up the tree to find the acorn. It'd be funny. Anyways, so it doesn't matter. There is always an animal just devouring another animal, right? It's why is this fun for anyone to watch this? The hired hands are just like the animal devouring another, and this is what self-righteousness will do. It'll sacrifice you to preserve itself. Because the minute you stop measuring up, you'll be cut off. You'll condemn yourself or condemn other people. This is what rebellion and sin will do. They will lure you into the illusion that you'll be satisfied and leave you alone when you realize you're empty. And the hired hands represent those who care about themselves more than they care about the sheep. And Jesus is nothing like that. Because notice in these verses, 5 times Jesus says, I laid down my life. See, when sin was coming to hunt you down, when hell was coming to hunt you down, Jesus threw himself between you and your enemies, and he was devoured that you may escape and that you may live and live abundantly. And that's why he says, I am the good shepherd. I lay my life down for the sheep. I lay my life down for you. Jesus says, let me willingly give up my life so that you don't have to face eternal death and hell and sin ravaging your life. He's different than any other way. He won't use his power to destroy people or use them to spit them out. He loves us so much that he died for us. See, just a few chapters later in John chapter 19, I think we need to remember the details of Jesus' crucifixion, because so often this story, if you've been in church for a long time, can grow old to us. Or if you've never been in church before, you might not hear the real gruesome details of Jesus' death. But I think they matter for us to know really what he did for us willingly. In John chapter 19, verse 5, we see the crown of thorns, a robe, and a king of the Jews claim above his head as a slap in the face and as a way to mock this utterly unking-like Jesus. We see the flogging in John chapter 19, verse 14, where Roman soldiers strapped their victims and beat them with weapons that had little thin strips of leather, and at the end of those would often be a knot, a bone, a stone, or glass. And they would rake that across the backs of their victims 40 times. We see the walk to the cross in verse 7, because it wasn't enough for him to be beat and nailed to a cross, but Rome wanted every person to remember this. So they walked him through the middle of town. We see the humiliating game for his clothes. In verse 23, because it wasn't enough that he was walked through the center of town, but it was common practice for the soldiers to throw dice and make a game for victims' clothes and the possessions that they had. John 19:25 tells us that this circle of onlookers included Jesus' mother Mary, his aunt, a family friend, and Mary Magdalene. And Luke's account tells us all who knew him stood by to watch. See, the same people who saw him wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger, are now watching him hang on a cross. And Jesus had been with them. He drove out demons, he healed the sick, he shared meals with them, he laughed with them, he cried with them, and they stayed and watched Jesus push against death for 6 hours. And then in verses 28 through 30, Jesus says, "It is finished." And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. He laid down his life. The line in Greek basically says he let go of his life. Because no one killed him, God chose this. He is the good shepherd who gave up his life for you, for me, the rest of the world, and then he said, "It is finished," and he let out a sigh. See, the God who had all power and could have done anything was the kind of God who wrapped a towel around his waist and washed his disciples' feet. Even the one that he knew was going to betray him. The God of all power who could have done anything compared himself to a shepherd who knows his sheep, their pain, their names. He's the God of the entire universe, and he knows you, and he knows me. He knows your name, he knows your story, he knows every hair on your head, and he says, "I love you, I love you, I love you, I know, I know, I know. I will take care of you, I will lead you, but you have to follow me." So I want to just ask you 2 questions tonight. Have you entered through the door? Jesus promises that whoever enters will be saved. And who else is there like Jesus in all of human history that sacrifices himself for you, for us? Who else can tend to our weary souls, our deepest wounds? Who can be our closest friend when people let us down? Jesus. He is the door. He knows you by name. He knows your temptations, what you really want. He knows what you face. And he asks you to trust him, to let him come between you and the enemy who is only there to destroy you. And just says, "Let me tend to your wounded soul. Let me guard you, let me protect you. You don't have to protect yourself anymore. I am your shepherd. I want to be the oil in your life so that when the enemy comes and tries to take you out, all you have to do is come to me." So have you walked through the door and said, "Jesus, you are it for me"? And secondly, I just want to ask you, is he your shepherd? Because some of you have entered through the door. You made the decision to follow Jesus, but if you were really honest over this last year, he has not been the main voice in your life. See, at the very beginning, I asked you, who or what is discipling you? Who influences you? What voices guide you? And so I just want to ask you tonight, what do you really want? What do you really need? Do you need more peace? Do you need more joy? Because right here is where the Good Shepherd is found. Jesus came 2,000 years ago not just to save you to go to heaven, but so that you could be free right now. And he didn't die for everyone but you. He died for you. And so have you trusted him as the shepherd? Do you trust him now as the shepherd? Or have you said, man, you know what? I got to come back to him. I got to make him the Lord of my life. So I want to end tonight just by reading what the Psalms write about the Lord as our shepherd. And if you need to close your eyes, you can do that, whatever it takes for you to just sit for a moment and receive this. You can do that. Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He takes me to lush pastures. He leads me to refreshing water. He restores my strength. He leads me down the right paths for the sake of his reputation. Even when I must walk through the darkest valley, I fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff reassure me. You prepare a feast before me in plain sight of my enemies. You refresh my head with oil. My cup is completely full. And surely your goodness and faithfulness will pursue me all my days, and I will live in the Lord's house for the rest of my life. Jesus, you are the kind of shepherd who leaves the 99 to find the one. You find us. In your name, I pray that the voice of the enemy would be silenced in the ears of every person in this room tonight. God, I know that for so many of my young friends, the enemy has taken up residence in their minds. And tonight, you want to jump between what is destroying them to bring them back to you. God, that the lies that have made their way into their hearts and minds and lives that tell them that they can't be anything else, they've already gone down this road, God, that you would silence those. And that you would set us free to know that you are our shepherd. We do not have to lead ourselves. We do not have to push ourselves. We don't have to protect ourselves. You are our shepherd, God, and you are nothing like anyone else. We love you, Jesus. It's in your name. Amen.